Right. So are you ready to, like, take a trip back in time with us? Today we're doing a deep dive into, I think, one of history's most notorious unsolved mysteries,
Oh, yeah,
Jack the Ripper.
for sure.
You probably know the name at least, but we're going to go way deeper than just like the headlines and the basics.
Yeah.
We're using excerpts from the massive Wikipedia article on Jack the Ripper as our source material.
Right.
So think of this as your shortcut to becoming a Ripper expert, minus the, late nights scouring dusty archives.
It's a case that keeps drawing people in, And not just the brutality, but the way the story became a legend in Victorian London. And it still fascinates us more than a century later.
Totally. Okay, so picture this. 1888,
Mm-hmm.
London's East End, specifically Whitechapel district.
Right.
And forget those fancy Victorian drawing rooms you see in movies.
Yeah.
This was a different world.
Oh, yeah. This was the underbelly of London, overcrowded and just riddled with poverty. For many, especially women, the only way to survive was, well, let's just say it wasn't pretty. Police estimated over 1,200 women working as prostitutes in Whitechapel at the time.
Wow.
Just to give you an idea.
It's hard to imagine the desperation. And I read that over half the children born in that area didn't even make it to age 5.
Yeah, a grim statistic. Really paints a picture.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the poverty. You had social unrest brewing, anti-Semitism. Whitechapel was a tinderbox ready to ignite.
Yeah.
And then into this already volatile situation
Right.
steps Jack the Ripper.
Okay, so let's get to the crimes themselves. We're going to talk about the canonical 5.
Right.
The murders that most experts agree were likely committed by the same person.
Yeah.
5 women.
Yes.
Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly.
Right.
Their stories and how they intersect, I think, are key to understanding this whole mystery.
Yeah, and each murder, sadly, added to the growing terror in Whitechapel. What started as, a brutal murder quickly escalated. Right.
The killer became more brazen, the mutilations more horrific.
Yeah.
Deep slash wounds to the throat, abdominal mutilations. It was a pattern that terrified the city.
So let's break down the timeline.
Okay.
It all began August 31st, 1888.
Right.
Mary Ann Nichols found murdered on Bucks Row.
Yeah.
Her throat was slashed, abdomen ripped open. Gruesome discovery. But at this point, no one knew what was about to unfold.
Right.
Then a week later, Annie Chapman's body's discovered in Hanbury Street.
Yeah.
This time, the abdomen wasn't just cut, it was completely opened, and the killer had removed her uterus and parts of her bladder and vagina.
Wow.
The level of violence had clearly escalated.
Definitely.
It's chilling how the details become more and more disturbing.
Yeah.
And then, September 30th, the infamous double event.
Yes.
2 women murdered on the same night,
Right.
Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes.
Unbelievable.
Stride was found on Burner Street,
Right.
her throat deeply slashed, but interestingly, no other mutilations.
Some believe the killer was interrupted, others that it was a copycat.
Right.
Regardless, it added to the panic gripping Whitechapel.
Yeah, for sure.
And then just hours later, Eddowes' body was found in Mitre Square.
Right.
This time, the mutilations were the most extensive yet.
It's crazy.
Uterus and left kidney were surgically removed.
Wow.
Her face disfigured.
Oh my God.
It was becoming clear they were dealing with someone who not only had anatomical knowledge, but also seemed to be taunting the police.
Yeah, and the taunting continued.
Right.
A piece of Eddowes' bloody apron was found near a message scrawled on a wall.
Right.
The infamous Golston Street graffito blaming the Jews.
Yeah.
Whether it was written by the killer or not, it inflamed anti-Semitism and put even more pressure on the police.
Talk about a case spiraling out of control.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on November 9th, the final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, was found in her room on Miller's Court.
Right.
This one was different, even more horrific.
Yeah. Kelly's murder was the culmination of the Ripper's escalating brutality. Her body was so extensively mutilated it was almost unrecognizable. Eviscerated, her face disfigured, and her heart was missing from the scene.
Oh, my.
It was as if the killer was making a final, terrifying statement.
Wow.
Just awful.
Yeah, it's a grim picture, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And we can't lose sight of the fact that behind these gruesome details
Right.
were real women
Yeah,
whose lives were tragically cut short.
absolutely.
But the question that has haunted everyone for over a century remains.
Yeah.
who is Jack the Ripper?
Ah, the million-dollar question. And the truth is, despite countless theories, books, even movies dedicated to unmasking him,
Yeah.
we still don't have a definitive answer.
It's almost like the mystery itself is part of the fascination, right?
I think so.
A blank slate onto which we can project our own fears, our own ideas about who this shadowy figure might have been.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
The limited forensic evidence of the time, the lack of a clear motive, it creates this void that everyone, from professional investigators to armchair detectives, has tried to fill.
So let's talk about some of those theories, those suspects.
Right.
Names like Prince Albert Victor, Walter Sickert, even Lewis Carroll have been thrown around.
Oh, wow.
Was Jack the Ripper a royal, an artist, a famous author?
It's important to remember that many of these names, while they make for a good story, were never even considered by the police at the time.
Right.
They've become popularized through speculation, often with very little evidence to back them up.
So who did the police actually focus on? Who are the main suspects in their investigation?
Well, their investigations naturally focused on individuals who fit certain profiles.
Right.
Butchers, slaughterers, anyone who worked with knives and had anatomical knowledge was looked at closely.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's easy to see why. The precision of the cuts, the removal of organs, it pointed to someone with at least some understanding of the human body.
But it's not that simple. The police surgeon who examined the victims, Thomas Bond, actually pushed back against the idea that the killer was a skilled surgeon.
Ah.
He believed the mutilations, while gruesome, were more indicative of a frenzied attack than careful surgical precision.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So if not a surgeon, then who?
Well, one of the earliest suspects was a man known as Leather Apron,
Okay.
a Jewish shoemaker named John Pizer. He was known for his violent behavior, particularly towards women,
Right.
but his alibi for the nights of the murders checked out,
Yeah.
and he was eventually cleared.
There were also 3 key suspects mentioned in Sir Melville Macnaghten's 1894 memorandum, right?
Exactly. Montague John Druitt,
Okay.
a barrister who committed suicide shortly after the final canonical murder, Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant with a history of mental illness,
Yeah.
and Michael Ostrog, a Russian conman and petty thief.
So what's the evidence against each of them? Were they ever actually close to being caught?
Unfortunately, it's mostly circumstantial. Druitt's suicide happening so soon after the murders fueled speculation,
Yeah.
but there's no direct evidence linking him to the crimes.
Right.
Kosminski was identified by a witness, but he was also deemed mentally unfit to stand trial.
Oh.
And Ostrog, well, he was a known criminal,
Yeah.
but again, nothing concrete tied him to the Ripper murders.
It seems like every suspect we've discussed has their own set of problems, their own lack of solid evidence.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to where we started.
Right.
We still don't know who Jack the Ripper was.
And that's the paradox, isn't it? Despite the advancements in forensic science, despite countless investigations, both professional and amateur, the Ripper's true identity remains elusive.
It really is.
And perhaps that's why we're still so fascinated, over a century later.
It's almost like the lack of answers keeps the story alive.
Yeah.
Allows us to continue speculating,
Right.
to put forth our own theories.
Absolutely, and that's led to the rise of Ripperology.
Oh, yeah.
A whole field dedicated to studying and analyzing every detail of the case. People are still poring over the evidence, hoping to find that one missing piece that will finally reveal the killer's identity.
But beyond the mystery, beyond the whodunit,
Right.
what is it about this case that continues to capture our imaginations?
Right.
Why are we still talking about Jack the Ripper?
I think it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
The unsolved mystery, of course, is a huge draw.
Right.
We humans are naturally curious. We want to solve puzzles.
Yeah.
And the Ripper case is the ultimate unsolved puzzle.
A real-life jigsaw puzzle with a missing piece.
Exactly. But it goes deeper than that.
Okay.
The Ripper case taps into some of our deepest fears.
Right.
The idea of a shadowy figure stalking the streets, preying on innocent victims. That's a primal fear that resonates across time and cultures.
And let's not forget the setting.
Right.
Victorian London with its fog-choked streets,
Yeah.
gas lights casting flickering shadows.
Mm-hmm.
It creates such a chilling atmosphere. It's the perfect backdrop for a tale of terror.
And remember, this was a time of immense social change, of upheaval.
Right.
The Ripper murders became a symbol of the dark side of Victorian society.
Yeah.
The poverty and violence that lurked beneath the surface of respectability.
It also exposed the limitations of law enforcement at the time.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Think about it. No DNA evidence, No sophisticated surveillance techniques.
Right.
They were largely reliant on eyewitness accounts and deduction.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you appreciate how far forensic science has come.
Definitely.
And then there's the role of the media.
Oh, totally.
This case was a media frenzy,
Absolutely.
with newspapers competing for the most sensational headlines, the most gruesome details.
Right.
It was the birth of modern tabloid journalism, where fear and fascination sell papers.
Yeah,
It's incredible how this one case changed the way we consume news,
it really is.
how it blurred the lines between fact and fiction. And that brings us to the Ripper's enduring legacy.
Yeah.
He's become a boogeyman,
Uh-huh.
a cautionary tale,
Right.
a symbol of evil.
He's transcended the realm of history and entered our collective consciousness. Totally. We see him in movies, books, even video games. Jack the Ripper is more than just a killer. He's a cultural icon,
Right.
a symbol of mystery and terror that continues to fascinate and horrify us.
It's almost as if by constantly retelling his story,
Right.
by trying to understand him,
Yeah.
we're trying to exert some control over the fear he represents,
Yeah, I think so.
to make sense of the senseless.
Perhaps. Or maybe we're just drawn to the darkness, to the unknown.
Yeah.
Whatever the reason, Jack the Ripper remains a powerful figure in our cultural landscape, a reminder of the enduring power of mystery and the darker side of human nature.
And that brings us to, I think, a crucial aspect of this case.
Yeah.
One that often gets overshadowed by the focus on the killer himself,
Right.
the victims.
Right.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the theories and the speculation and the hunt for the killer.
Right.
But we can't forget that at the heart of this story are 5 women
Yeah.
whose lives were tragically cut short.
Absolutely.
They were more than just victims.
Yeah.
They were individuals with their own stories, their own hopes and dreams.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that they weren't just names on a police report.
Right.
They were mothers, daughters, sisters, friends.
Yeah.
They were human beings who, due to circumstances beyond their control, ended up in the poverty-stricken, dangerous world of Whitechapel.
So let's take some time to really think about the canonical 5. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. What can we learn about their lives?
Right.
What led them to that fateful night?
Well, sadly, for many women in Whitechapel at that time, prostitution was a means of survival.
Right.
Poverty, lack of opportunity, abusive relationships.
Yeah.
These factors often forced women into desperate situations.
It's heartbreaking to think about the choices they were forced to make just to survive.
It is.
Let's take Mary Ann Nichols, for example.
Okay.
She was married with 5 children, but her husband left her,
Right.
leaving her to fend for herself and her family in poverty. She turned to prostitution to make ends meet.
And Annie Chapman,
Yeah.
she struggled with alcoholism and was estranged from her husband.
Right.
She also resorted to prostitution to support herself.
And then there's Elizabeth Stride,
Yeah.
a Swedish immigrant who had a history of turbulent relationships and periods of homelessness.
Right.
She, too, turned to sex work to survive.
Yeah.
It's a recurring theme, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
These women were trapped in a system that offered them very few options.
Right.
And Catherine Eddowes,
Mm-hmm.
her story echoes the same struggles. In and out of workhouses, desperately trying to support herself and her children.
Right.
It's no surprise that many women saw prostitution as a way out, a way to escape the endless cycle of poverty.
Yeah. And finally, Mary Jane Kelly, considered the Ripper's final victim.
Right.
She was reportedly quite beautiful and intelligent, but she too fell into a life of prostitution,
Yeah.
eventually meeting her horrific end in her own room. It's a tragic reminder that even in the midst of a bustling city, some lives can be so easily overlooked, so easily forgotten.
It's almost unbearable to imagine the fear these women must have felt,
Right.
living in Whitechapel knowing a killer was on the loose.
And sadly, their murders might have received even less attention if they weren't prostitutes.
Yeah.
Their social standing or lack thereof
Right.
made them easier targets, both for the killer and for societal indifference.
It's a stark reminder of the inequality and injustice that permeated Victorian society.
Yeah.
How certain lives were deemed less valuable, less worthy of protection.
Exactly. The Ripper preyed on the most marginalized members of society,
Yeah.
those who were already struggling to survive.
Right.
And in a way, their deaths exposed the deep-rooted problems of poverty, homelessness, and violence against women that plague the East End.
So maybe the Jack the Ripper case is about more than just a serial killer.
Right.
Maybe it's a cautionary tale about social responsibility,
Yeah.
about recognizing and addressing the systemic issues that create vulnerability
Yeah.
and allow violence to flourish.
That's a powerful insight.
Yeah.
While the mystery of Jack the Ripper's identity may never be solved, we can still learn from this dark chapter of history.
Right.
By remembering the victims, by acknowledging their struggles,
Yeah.
and by working to address the root causes of violence and inequality,
Yeah.
we can honor their memory and strive for a safer, more just world.
It's a chilling thought, but you're right. This case forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about society, both then and now. And it reminds us that behind every headline, every sensational story, there are real people
Yeah.
whose lives are impacted, whose stories deserve to be heard.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to
Mhm.
leave you with this thought. Imagine yourself walking the streets of Whitechapel in 1888.
Okay.
The fog is thick, the gaslights cast an eerie glow, and there's a sense of unease in the air. What was it like to be a woman in that environment?
Yeah.
Knowing a killer was on the loose, what anxieties and fears did they face every day?
It's scary to even think about.
By humanizing the victims, by putting ourselves in their shoes,
Right.
we can gain a deeper understanding of the true impact of these crimes and the importance of working towards a world where such tragedies are less likely to occur.
That's a powerful image to leave us with.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark heart of Victorian London.
absolutely.
We hope this deep dive has not only sparked your curiosity about the Jack the Ripper case, but has also made you think about the social context, the victims, and the enduring lessons we can learn from this haunting chapter of history.